Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke Johnson and Robert Schut. Today is installment 7 of our continuing exploration of Soren Kierkegaard's philosophical fragments. Today, Bob will primarily be our instructor, and I'll be serving sort of in a supporting role, asking for some clarifying questions and adding any sort of information from the periphery. So, Bob, why don't you start things off the way you want to?
Okay. Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon which coast you're on. I wanted to start off today. I was doing a little research into Kierkegaard. I was looking for a particular quotation from Kierkegaard, and I ran into this little website that had a number of quotes, and I was reading through them, and I found one I just thought was delightful. And I wanted to share this with both you, Luke, and with the audience. The Bible is very easy to understand, but we Christians are a bunch of scheming swindlers. We pretend to be unable to understand it because we know very well the minute we understand, we're obligated to act accordingly. That's from his journals. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that speaks very clearly, very loudly to me in my earlier life. Hopefully not so loud anymore, but it's just he has a way with words and a way of being very blunt about things. And so that's my new favorite quote now from Kierkegaard.
Right. And it sort of illustrates many of the concepts that we've talked about earlier about how the truth causes us to be offended. And really that offense is a kind of a form of rebellion from the truth, right?
Yeah.
But we can resurrect some of those concepts, and I'm sure you'll sort of build on them today. I thought today we're covering chapter 4 from the philosophical fragments. I thought today was a nice continuation of and recapitulation of some of the themes that we've talked about in other places in the seminar. I thought towards the end of the 4th chapter, some new ideas were introduced. What were your overall feelings about this 4th chapter, Bob?
He packs a lot into this chapter, or a whole lot into this chapter, so much that I feel like what I'm doing today, as much as I wanted to cover, it still seems only like a summary. When I go back, after I do all my notes and I think about what I'm going to say, I'll go back and I'll read some of the things I've highlighted, and I'll say, well, I missed that, and I missed that. Yeah. Oh, I should have included this. It's just so much in this chapter. So I wanted to encourage the audience to actually not depend totally on you and me as their only source of Kierkegaard, that they really need to struggle through the literature itself, through the book itself, because it's through that struggle that they're going to spot something that means something to them. I don't know about you, Luke, but when I read it, I always highlight the things that mean something to me.
Yeah.
So this is it's always tailored to my experiences. And so I can't tell the whole story. I can only tell what seems to be appropriate to me and what jumps out at me. So you're getting a limited version of Kierkegaard, at least through me. I try to include as much as I can, but like I say, it is tailored through my experiences. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I find, I don't know, I've probably read this text 3, 4, 5 times in my life. And I think at different stages of my life, different things matter more. And details that I may have missed on the 2nd reading are more obvious on the 4th reading. So I expect that would go on till the end of my life, that on the 10th, 11th, 12th reading, that there would be new details that would jump out to me that I couldn't believe that I missed on the 3rd reading. So it's just weird. We do our best, and but we can't do people's work for them. We can help. But yeah. Ultimately, if you want to get an education, at some point you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and do it yourself.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. Well, this today, and go ahead. You're going to say something else?
It's just like, why don't we just get into the text then?
Okay. Yeah, chapter 4. Here we're going to continue our discussion, or actually emphasize the discussion of what it means to be a contemporary with the teacher, which I think we all know is Christ, but sometimes I might just kind of jump back and forth. But he calls him the teacher with a capital T. So what's the advantage? Is there an advantage to having walked with the teacher historically? which is an issue I think that a lot of us come up with at times. We wonder, those guys, they had a big advantage back then than us. We just hear about him, read about him, but they actually saw the guy.
Yeah, they could see him do miracles and put their fingers in the wounds on his hands. So, obviously it was much easier for the contemporary disciple to believe in Jesus because they got to hang out with him.
Right.
And, but yeah.
And Kierkegaard, though, he takes this, and this is a great argument that probably most people run away from. They don't want to deal with it, but he takes it head on, and he really deals with it. He gives us an argument as to why this isn't true, why the contemporary has no advantage over the non-contemporary, he calls him. And he bases his argument upon what he has already developed, and then throws a little bit more into the mix here, as Luke pointed out. So he tells us that God made an appearance as a servant, and he could not have accomplished his purpose if he sent someone lower than himself, even if he sent someone in the form like an archangel. There are some groups that believe that Jesus was an archangel. But will that work? For Kierkegaard, that doesn't work. God could not have sent anyone lower than himself. In the Socratic manner, he mentioned that the highest relationship is between man and man, because of this need of equality of love and understanding. And the equality is necessary, that a man and a man, or man and he means man and woman, or whatever the relationship, human to human, is the only way we can fully apprehend love from one another, so that we can understand one another. That is, I think, how he puts it, to understand the love, and I call it apprehend the love that we have for one another. If God did not come himself, the relations would have been at the Socratic level, which we were talking about. We would neither have had the moment nor the paradox. The teacher would have been accidental, meaning replaceable. Just like Luke and I, we come like one day I'll teach and Luke will teach the next day. We're kind of accidental to this whole project. If that were the case, that he was accidental, it would have been merely the teaching that was important, like it is between Luke and I. We're trying to teach Kierkegaard. That's the important thing. Me being who I am, or Luke being who he is maybe a piece of it, but it's not what we're trying to do. This isn't the Luke and Bob show where we want to, cram Luke and Bob's philosophy. We're interested in trying to teach Kierkegaard. So we're accidental. This is a good explanation of it, I guess.
I think so.
If that were the case, we would merely have been the teaching that was important, and it could have been delivered just by the means of a book. Maybe the teacher didn't even need to be there. He could have just wrote everything he wanted to teach, delivered a book, and said, here it is, enjoy. But that's not what happened. The life
God kind of tried. Yeah, God kind of tried to do that, right? He gave us some tablets on a mountaintop, did he not?
Yeah, that may have been a good example. So some today believe that this teacher didn't even exist. There are different groups who believe it's not important whether the teacher existed or not. What's important is the teaching. And this isn't the way Kierkegaard sees things. Now, if it were an angel, if let's say God sent an angel to do this instead of himself, there would be no paradox. It would just be a teaching, because only God is able to love us in a manner that would make it a paradox. The idea of the eternal and the temporal existing simultaneously together is the paradox. We wouldn't have that paradox. The love of an angel. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I don't want to interrupt you, and maybe you're about to address the question that I'm asking here, but oh man, if God did send some sort of archangel, I mean, there are plenty of things that are rationally problematic and paradoxical about an angel, are there not? I mean,
yeah.
maybe I don't know what the qualities of an angel are, but I mean, maybe angels are eternal. Probably not, because I guess God created angels, so they'd be predicated upon his existence. So they see. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there might be some paradoxes that angels introduce. I'm not sure what they are because I don't really know what angels are and how we're defining them. But it seems like the main thing is that angels might not be able to bring and there's something about the unique paradox that is God becoming infinite and finite and being able to bestow a condition that an angel cannot. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. And I wrestled that with because I wanted to come up with a good way to explain that. Why? So I kept asking myself those questions. Well, why? Why not? Because an angel can't deliver the condition. Only God can deliver the condition. Kierkegaard says this, as we'll see as I go through my notes. And the condition is, we'll find out, is himself. An angel can only, by their definition, angelos is the messenger. He can only bring messengers. He's not God. He's not divine. So here, again, we'd be in the Socratic format. We'd be, so one angel could bring it, another angel could have brought it. You know, it didn't have to be any particular angel. Or he could have just dumped a book on us and said, here's what I want you to learn, and that's it. But we're talking about an ontological relationship of being where only God can be God. Angels cannot be God.
I think that's a great point. I think we're getting at something that has always sort of troubled me about this. So could we say, Bob, that the Socratic relationship is the highest relationship between man and man, but might we also say, if we do believe in angels, that the highest relationship between man and angel is Socratic?
Yeah, it would have to be Socratic because both would be replaceable. They'd both be accidental.
Yeah.
See, because it wouldn't be an archangel. It could be another archangel. It could be a lesser angel. So if God could send somebody lesser than himself, he could have sent any deliver the message. In the Old Testament, that's exactly what he did do. He sent angels to deliver messages to the Jews. But in the New Testament, he doesn't deliver a message. He becomes the message.
Right. And I get that part. I just wonder if I encountered an angel, if that would be a purely Socratic relationship. Like if I never encountered Jesus, but I encountered an archangel, would it be fair to say that that is a purely Socratic relationship? I don't know.
Well, you'd be overwhelmed probably by the situation, no doubt, right? Somebody, what would be the word? Somebody so spiritually beyond you. It wouldn't be the highest Socratic relationship because Kierkegaard says it's between man and man. Because, I have it in my notes, but I'll get a little ahead of myself. Because only a human can love another human to its fullest capacity. An angel cannot do that. Nor can you love an angel to the fullest capacity as a human. He's in a whole different category. And he can't... Go ahead.
But do you think the Socratic relationship is based upon love of individuals? It seems like the Socratic relationship is more about getting an individual to turn inward to discover truth that has been implanted within them.
Yeah, but the angel, you see, cannot deliver the condition.
Right,
and
I agree.
The way Kierkegaard explains it, and he keeps going back to the Socratic method, is in the Socratic method, you have the condition already.
Yes.
So we need, if he says in Climacus's method or system, he says man is void of the condition. So he needs someone to give him the condition. So what kind of a being can give him the condition to break out of the Socratic situation? Right. The only one being is divine, is God.
Yeah.
The angel can't break us out of the Socratic method. Does that do it?
Yeah, I think so. I generally understand, but I at the same time think there's probably some interesting research to be done here, but I think to belabor the point is probably to hold up our teaching of the lesson.
Okay, well, we could talk about that. It requires a lot of thinking. It does on my part anyway, to think through every possible door that I can go through to say, where does it lead me in my logic? So, probably want to do the same thing. And as far as angels go, we have a quotation from Hebrews chapter 1, verse 6 that helps us a little bit too. He says, and again, when he bringeth in the first begotten into the world, he saith, let all the angels of God worship him. So he's making a definite distinction in Scripture that this is not an angel. This is something more than an angel. So we have here this distinction that the writer of Hebrews definitely brings out, that the teacher is more than just someone to deliver the message. So an angel, no matter how it might have loved us, could not establish this ontological relationship between God and man. In other words, he can only tell us about God. He can't love us with the love of God. And that's, again, the biggest distinction. There'd be no collision between reason and the unknown. And this whole idea of the angelic, the reason I'm bringing this up is that in the 3rd century, 2nd, 3rd century, there was a development called the Arian heresy or controversy, where the claim was that Christ was actually the first created angel of God. But Kierkegaard certainly wouldn't adhere to that because it does not fit into this explanation of the condition.
Do you have any more I've never heard of this. Do you have any more background information on the Arian heresy controversy? I think it may be, since you have theological training, it might be something that you know as common knowledge. But to me, I think this might be the first time I've ever heard of this.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I guess I've read it so much that I assumed it was common knowledge. So that's great. I'm glad you stopped me. Yeah, Arian was a priest. I think it was in the 3rd century. Like I say, 2nd or 3rd century. He was a priest, and he had an idea. This is during the time they were trying to develop the Trinitarian doctrine. This preceded Constantine and the the council at Carthage and all these councils to try to define God.
Right.
So Arian had an idea that became very popular. It was, well, Christ is really an angel, the embodiment of an angel. Turns out Michael, the archangel, who is the first creation of God, and therefore he's the first son of God. And so he tried to make this compatible with the New Testament. And a lot of the Eastern churches bought into this idea. The Western churches were more Trinitarian. No, he's the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He's God. He's all God, all man. But the Eastern church thought differently. They said, well, wait a second, don't be so hasty. Arian might have a good idea here. So this idea spread, and this controversy spread. It was a big clash between the early church as to which side were you on. Were you an Arian, or were you a Trinitarian, or were you modified Arian? Even Constantine and his theological advisor were kind of on the border. One of his theological advisors was an Arian. So Constantine is sometimes claimed to be pro-Trinitarian, and he forced it down the throat of the church, but that's really not true, because his own advisor was actually an Arian, and his son was an Arian or a modified Arian. So there's all sorts of history here I won't go into.
Wow, it's fascinating stuff. Does that divide still exist, or did they eventually get that reconciled?
Well, they got it eventually. Arius, actually, what's his name? Arius. He recanted, I guess you might call it, under pressure. To be fair, he recanted under certain political pressures. He was excommunicated and so forth, as well as anybody. And this one kind of went back and forth. The Arians excommunicated the Trinitarians. The Trinitarians excommunicated the Arians. That game. This was all in that 2nd, 3rd century. But it's still actually alive today. Jehovah's Witnesses are actually Arians. Okay.
Really?
Yeah, they believe that Jesus was an angel. And there are some people who just kind of attend everyday churches who can't quite grasp the idea of a Trinitarian God. So they kind of think, maybe Jesus was something else. Maybe he was an archangel. So it's still alive today. It's just not spoken about so much.
I don't want to get. I know we have a lot of Kierkegaard to do, but I just because I think it's relevant, and I think a lot of people would be interested in this, and and because you are a bit of authority on this, I don't toss and turn about Trinitarian Arian controversy so much anymore. Was there one particular text that kind of helped you be okay with the triune God?
No, not one particular one.
Because Kierkegaard doesn't really address the Trinity all that much.
And I'm more Kierkegaardian when it comes to that. There is really very scant evidence as to that identity of Christ. The identity of Christ is somewhat of a mystery. It's in Scripture. There's a lot of really good stuff in Scripture, but some of it's ambiguous. So it's kind of hard to nail it down. But I can't even explain it. I would just say I kind of deal with it like Kierkegaard does.
Yeah.
Jesus is who he is. And yes, he is divine. He is the embodiment of God. He's not the embodiment of an angel. There's nothing that tells us in Scripture that that you can point to and say he is the embodiment of an angel. There's other things that contradict that, but there's a lot that show that he is the embodiment of God. So yes, he's the embodiment of God. Whether it's a Trinitarian, I think, is a way of the theologians to try to explain it, and that's why Kierkegaard doesn't really bother with it. It's an explanation of it. So in order to explain it, it's almost to assume you really understand it. But it's really the identity of the eternal and the temporal is more paradoxical. It's not requires an explanation. It requires an understanding that it exists and let it do what it's supposed to do as a paradox. But too many people, as well as myself, wanted to define it, wanted to say, okay, there's got to be an explanation. But no, there doesn't. And that's where we hit this paradox, the wall of knowledge. Too many people want to go through the wall or jump over the wall to get to the other side of the paradox. And I did for many years try to do that. And I figured I couldn't. So, okay. Any other questions on that?
No, but I found that to be very educative and informative. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay. Now, for man to be able to fully enjoy and apprehend the love of God, he would have to be equal in some way, according to Kierkegaard. Remember, love has to be two beings that are of the same type, like humanity and humanity, to fully apprehend love. This doesn't mean that we have to become gods to love God. See, this is, again, part of the paradox. Does that mean to love God, we have to become gods? Well, if we think back to the story Kierkegaard told earlier, he had a reason for telling this story about the king and the maiden. Right. And he said, what happened when he tried to raise the maiden up to his level? It didn't work. It didn't work because it was a deceptive love. It was a deceptive love. He was deceiving her into thinking she was more than she was. And so he tried to make her equal, but it didn't work. So this is why we can't become gods. God can't just say, okay, I'm going to make you gods, not to mention all the sinfulness we have and all that stuff. That's even beside the point. How would he do that? Now, this is why God must become man, truly man, or it would also be a deception. So God can't just imitate a man. He has to truly become a man in order to love man and be loved by man, to create that equality. And this is according to Kierkegaard. This is why God becomes man, so that he can love man, and man can also love him to the fullest. Otherwise, God would be the king, we would be the maidens, and we'd be forever divided, where we'd never be able to realize the love of God to its fullness. So now Kierkegaard moves on here, and he's trying to emphasize in this next little section, this is about the teacher, not about the teaching. God's presence in human form is not just a means to teach, but as a teacher, it is a means to become. Hopefully that's kind of my own words there, but hopefully I can capture that idea. This is how he brings the condition to man, which is going to be explained a little later on. Without the condition, man can't learn anything, for he doesn't have the condition that allows him this full understanding. This is what was missing in the Socratic way. It was assumed that man already had the condition, but Climacus tells us, no, this isn't so. Let's assume he doesn't have it. How then does he get it? Well, the assumption here then is we are lacking that condition. It's through the paradox that man receives the condition. So he kind of try to keep our terms straight, and I will try to keep those terms straight as we go. And he says the condition both draws the learner and at the same time repels the learner. And this shows us how self-discovery can sometimes be frightening. So to stand before God in any way both attracts us towards him, but at the same time there's a repulsion, there's a fear. That's why it's called the fear of God in the Old Testament. People say, oh no, we love God, we don't fear him. But there has to be an element of fear to see God au naturel, so to speak. To come before the presence of full truth and full righteousness, we've got to be humbled in that presence. So what is this condition again? That he knows he's in error. In other words, according to Climacus, man is in this self-deception. He's in this state of error. So the first thing he has to do is come to that understanding. So the condition is knowing he's in error. What does it condition, though? As he puts it, what does the condition condition? It conditions the understanding of the eternal. So first, we have to come to our understanding that we are deceived, that we are easily deceived, and that we don't know the truth of ourselves, that we don't have the condition. Then, once we have the condition, then we can begin to understand the eternal. So the condition draws and repels. Now, this sounded familiar to me, so I had to look this up in the concept of dread or the concept of anxiety. You may recognize this quotation here. This is one that'll give you a headache. It's a dread is a sympathetic antipathy and an antipathetic sympathy. Okay, so that's something kind of like a cone. You have to sit there and meditate on it to say, what does he mean here? What he's saying is that we're drawn by what repels us, and we're repelled by what attracts us. So we have this paradoxical relationship with God, that he draws us to him, but at the same time we're repelled by him. And there's other things. I think he uses this as the artist Monk did that picture, the existential picture, standing on the side of the cliff. The Scream, do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. And the idea of the edge of a cliff, it kind of draws us to want to look over the edge. But at the same time, we're scared the heck out of it. At least I am, because I'm afraid of heights. It's attractive to want to see the view, but at the same time, it repels you because you're afraid you're going to fall.
Oh, that's the most, I think that might be kind of the, I think people have always talked about sort of that ledge, because you need to sort of have that ledge in order to take a leap. But I think the vocabulary that you use to paint that feeling is probably some of the best I've heard. I really appreciate your description of it.
Oh, wow. Well, coming from you, really, that is a compliment. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you made me. I really felt like you induced that vertiginous feeling within me in your description. I like that.
Well, hopefully the others in the audience felt the same thing. That's what we want to do here. So when he became a servant, when God became a servant, he didn't hide his ministry, according to Kierkegaard. He was humble, he was low. He wasn't dressed as they did in the palaces. He had no earthly advantages, really. He gave up pretty much everything. The things here, some think that since he was a Superman, that it was easier for Jesus because he had these powers. But Kierkegaard says, no, not so. And then he lists, I'm going to give you a list of things that Kierkegaard says. He didn't call on the legions of angels when he was tempted. He lived through the temptations like a normal man.
Right.
His thoughts and his concerns are not the same as most men in general. He had provisions. Provisions didn't matter. I'm sorry. Possessions didn't matter to him. And he didn't worry about his daily bread, where he would sleep. He had no woman by his side. He didn't get married, unlike some religions. Mormons believe he was married, but Scripture doesn't teach us that. He had no wife, in order to distract him from his ministry. He called upon his Father for help rather than exercise his own power, his own will. He was hungry. He was thirsty. He suffered pain. He even cried under emotional distress at the death of his friend Lazarus. So he had every facet of being a human being. Exercise. The scriptures say in Colossians that he emptied himself of these powers. So he could be a real human being, fully God, and yet at the same time, fully man. So he was... Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, you can see me. You can see me want to ask a question, right?
I can anticipate. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I think the question that I think can anticipate as well is, yes, there are obvious examples and times when he refrained from doing miraculous activities, but also the Bible is littered with episodes of him, like doing all sorts of miracles, specifically like raising Lazarus from the dead. So how do you square what you're saying here with those miraculous moments of Jesus? I guess, and this, I guess, this gets into greater questions about how the person who was contemporaneous with Jesus had some advantage over us because they got to witness these miracles. And so it's almost like Jesus had to sprinkle in a few miracles. He didn't go and do everything, but he had to give just enough mix to leave it sort of ambiguous so people could be led to that ledge in order to really believe in him subjectively.
That's part of it.
How do you understand the miracles of Jesus?
Okay, there's two ways, and I don't think that there's a dark line that says, okay, on this side, is you don't understand, on this side you do. I think it's each of us is probably going to draw from Scripture a way to understand it. What I draw from Scripture is Christ called upon. Well, he even says he calls upon his Father to perform these miracles. So it's not like he's thinking, I'm doing these all myself, but he calls upon his Father to perform the miracles. Let's see, what was the other side of it? Was that I lost it. But that was really the major thing. The miracles that he performs, perhaps it's not always mentioned that he's calling upon his Father, but he understands that he is special. I wouldn't take that away. He knew he was the Christ. He knew he was the anointed one. He knew he was the Son of God. He gave us clues to this, but he did not allow that with his humanity.
Here's a question I want to know. Do you think his miracles are essential for communicating the condition?
No. Absolutely no. Because if they were, everybody who saw that miracle would have believed, but they didn't. And even the thousands of people who followed him eventually left him.
Right.
Because of the political pressure. So no, because there's always an explanation of miracles. You know, even back then, do you remember that the explanation that, well, you are the king of Beelzebub. That's how
Right.
you're doing these miracles.
Right.
So
Right.
no miracles.
Yeah, because
the miracle. It's you go ahead.
Because it's an inference, right? Like, you could make the inference that Jesus was a magician. You could make the inference that he was sent by Satan. You could make all sorts of inferences that maybe he had some sort of higher consciousness, or that he was a first angel, or all these other things.
Right.
I guess I'm just kind of curious, in your opinion, if miracles are not essential for bestowing the condition upon us, why do you think God gave Jesus the capacity to exercise miracles?
Well, there would be signs accompanying the Messiah, but again, the signs would be difficult to point out. He had to heal. Healing, you know, when you look at his miracles, he was a healer. Even Josephus speaks of him as being a healer. So his signs were not just, and he even said, I'm not going to produce these signs for you just like a magic show. You know, I'm not going to do this just so that you believe because you see the signs. He says he's doing these as evidence of who he was. He was trying to bring people in to say, it's not what I'm doing here, it's who I am that I'm trying to teach you. So those were to draw people in, so to speak, to say, I am the one who was promised, and this is my evidence of it. That's why I do these things. John the Baptist, well, I get in my notes later, but I'll bring it up now. There was one that was sent, John the Baptist. And of all the people, John the Baptist knew he was chosen by God. He went out and gave up everything to the desert. His job was to prepare the way of the Lord, prepare the way of Yahweh, of Jehovah. So he goes out and Jesus comes to him, and the sign is upon whom the Spirit of God dwells upon and sets upon. This will be the one. So he sees this sign, and he tells his disciples, you know, this is the one. But, well, he even says, he says, I'm not worthy to untie the thongs of your sandals. But yet later on, when John is captured and is about to be beheaded, he sends a messenger to Jesus, one of his disciples, to say, are you really the one? Are you really the one who is to come? Or is there supposed to be another one after you? So even John was not fully convinced by what he saw of the Messiah, which shows what Kierkegaard is trying to show here. There was no advantage, even for John the Baptist. He didn't have an advantage. He wasn't even sure based upon what he saw of the Messiah. So why would there be an advantage for others if even John the Baptist wasn't? So this was just again, taking one of his clues down that road. But there's more paths. So what kind of a teacher, what kind of a learner? This will be interesting too. It's down that same idea. What kind of a learner would Jesus have attracted? So Jesus is there, or the teacher, whichever way we want to speak about him. He's there and he's teaching about heaven, the kingdom of God, and people are coming out. But what kind of people are going to come? Will the ones who are the true learners be the ones who come to question him and test him with tricky theological questions? Are those the learners? Kierkegaard says, no, those aren't the true learners. Is it the crowds who simply come to listen to him? No, those aren't really the true learners either. Well, how about the special teachers, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the scribes who came out to kind of test him a little bit and to poke at him to see how would he react if we do this or if we ask him this question? He says, no, those aren't the true learners either. Was he a man who came to simply learn something from him? Was it the guy who says, okay, this guy, this teacher, he's famous for being a rabbi. Let's see what I can learn from this rabbi. And he surprisingly says, no, this isn't a true learner either. This would bring Jesus as a Socratic teacher, just simply a teacher. I want to know what you've got to offer me. You know, what can I learn from you? So this is one of the temptations of being a contemporary. For the true learner sees him as an eternal teacher, not a temporal teacher. Because we're speaking of the moment and the collision, we must also have a condition, which is the knowledge of error or sin. And it's God who gives us condition. But the condition is the entry point into the eternal moment. So Kierkegaard talks about this, and I don't know how I can give you a vision of it, but this condition builds this collision. We have a collision, we have a condition, and a moment. All these are taking place almost simultaneously, bringing us to an eternal moment, the moment that we can see into the eternal. And Kierkegaard is going to tell us later, well, what eyes do you use to see the eternal? But he's holding back here. So we're being led to this eternal moment. Is it God who gives us this condition? Or actually, it is God who gives us this condition. And the condition is a consequence of the moment. And the moment is connected to the paradox. So they're all interconnected. I have a note here just to remind us in case we're losing track. And we are including, I'll bring this up, Luke, that we are trying to include a dictionary in the Noetic app so that when people are listening and they don't remember what something is, they can just quickly go to it and reread it. So I'm going to read a little definition of the moment. Kierkegaard also calls it the fullness of time. It's a decisive significance in time. It's a moment in time when a person becomes aware that they are in error and enters into this new birth. And it's when the eternal commitment or the resolve comes into a relation with an incommensurable or incomparable occasion. In other words, there's nothing else like this moment at all. This is a one-time moment. And it's when the eternal comes into existence. It's a presupposition, through a presupposition. The moment when the temporal comes into contact with the eternal. It's a revelation, not an instruction. So the moment is that moment of significance when God reveals himself to us. And it's all the things that happen inside to us at that moment. The moment of revelation may be the best synopsis of it.
Yeah,
would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And, I would also just add that in German, the moment is usually, it translates to Augenblick.
Oh, Augenblick. Okay. That's
yeah. I think it's kind of interesting. It means a blink of an eye.
Oh, it does. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know. I don't have any real German background, but great.
I think it's just a cool word.
Oh, no, it is. It is. A lot of times I notice authors will throw in some Latin and Greek and then German because there's probably no other word that can really capture what they're trying to say.
Right.
So they use the German word. That's good. So now there's a historical point of departure, historical to the eternal. Again, we're trying to capture that moment when our mind can break through or climb over the wall. I guess breakthrough is it, but to break through the wall of understanding and reasoning to say, what's on the other side of reasoning? At what point does the teacher or the learner leave the historical or the temporal? There's no difference between the historical departure of the contemporary disciple and us. So he's saying, well, when it comes to this moment, the learner the contemporary learner really has no advantage over us because it's that moment that really matters, that moment of God's revelation, which may or may not have taken place as a contemporary. There is no difference.
It would totally be possible, like we've talked about already, to be like walking side by side with Jesus and not having that moment and still be skeptical of who he is.
It was certainly true of Nicodemus, who was a teacher, became a friend of Jesus, listened to his teaching, but he said, when Jesus said you have to be born again, Nicodemus replies back, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Am I supposed to climb back on my mother's womb and be born again? Whether he was being pretentious, I don't know, but that's what he said. And Jesus says, you're supposed to be a teacher to the Jews, and yet you need a teacher yourself. So even somebody, this is an example of a contemporary, a smart contemporary, and actually a concerned contemporary who just didn't get it. So if the teaching was of utmost importance, we would have to revert back to the Socratic method. So if what Jesus was teaching was something that he could have written down in a book, then we'd be back to the Socratic method again. That Jesus would assume that man has the what was it called again? I have to look back on my notes here. Sometimes I forget these words.
Has imminence, or has the truth within?
The condition. No, the condition. That was right. Yeah, he has the condition. So in the Socratic way, they would have assumed he had the condition to start teaching him. Jesus would have assumed that man has the condition to get to truth, but he didn't. He was the condition, which we'll see as the story develops. Okay, getting to faith now. How does the learner then get to understand the paradox? So Kierkegaard, a lot of times, and so do other philosophers I notice, they tell us what not to do first. And just when we kind of get bored of, okay, now you've taught me all the things I'm not supposed to do, when are we going to get to what I am supposed to do? Sometimes they never get there. But at least Kierkegaard brings us to that point here. He said, how does the learner get to understand the paradox then? Well, he doesn't actually get to understand the paradox. But just to understand what it is, that it exists, because it's an encounter, not an understanding. It's more of an awareness than an understanding. So it's not that Kierkegaard is going to give us the trick and say, okay, here's how you understand the paradox. It's like, here's how you understand how Christ could be both divine and human. Here's the trick. He says, no. It's understanding it in the sense of accepting it. Understanding the paradox as it's presented, because that's really the true understanding of it. Next, he goes to give us the happy reason, happy paradox. And I wondered if he borrowed this term from, I was recently doing a little reading in my spare time of Hegel, which you'll probably say, if that's the best you can do in your spare time, you need some kind of help.
Yeah, okay. we need to get out more, Bob.
Yeah. So for whatever reason, go ahead.
What were you reading?
I was reading about a quote he uses called the unhappy consciousness. And I ran across this in a book where I was actually reading about Kierkegaard. And I thought, unhappy consciousness, that rings a bell about happy reason, unhappy reason. So I went and I started to look up the little research on it. It's in the phenomenology of the mind. And the unhappy consciousness is when we become aware of ourselves in some manner as a kind of schizophrenia. In other words, we go through life not thinking about who we are, but the moment we become aware that we are a person, then we start this schizophrenic idea. I'm not a Hegelian, so if I got it wrong, you can comment here, but that's why I understood it from the small excerpt that I read. But that's not, maybe he's playing on that, because he does play a lot on Hegelian vocabulary. So he might be purposely chose that term, happy reasoning and happy paradox. The reason and the paradox encounter one another happily in the moment. This is when it happens. When the reason sets it aside and the paradox gives itself. So in other words, it's stopping the pursuit of reason and just accepting the paradox as it is, letting the paradox work, letting the paradox do what it's supposed to do. But he says, but there's a third force at work here. It's not just the two things here, the paradox and reason at work and the moment, but it's another third entity, which is not realized by reason. Reasoning can't grasp this other power, this other force. And even the paradox doesn't really deal with it. It's something else. And this is now, he finally tells us, it's faith. Faith is what's a gift that's given to us that enables us to deal with paradox. Now, the next chapter I think even a little bit in the interlude. But chapter 5, he really gets deep into this idea of faith and how it helps. So he's not giving up a whole lot right here. He's kind of saving that. But faith is the condition of which we are speaking about all along. Faith is man's response to the paradox. It's man yielding to one who is greater. And that's what faith is. And this one, there's different definitions of faith. But faith is when we encounter someone who carries with himself or in his being power and truth. We can't help but to say, okay, this is the kind of guy I want to trust. He's capable of doing it, and he's a truthful person. So I'm going to, it draws out of me this sense of wanting to trust, this sense of faith.
So let me ask you something here, Bob.
Yeah.
Which can be traced back to our discussion about miracles earlier and stuff like that. I think we have kind of a fuller picture now of how condition, paradox, and truth all sort of work together. I guess what I'm trying to understand, or trying to get us to communicate to other individuals, if the miracles are not essential for the condition of us understanding our error and sin being bestowed upon us, then what is? What is it about? Like, what is it about this paradox, if it isn't the ability to perform miracles, that illuminates our sinfulness?
Great question. I love that question. Because, and I may be getting way ahead of myself here. That's okay. But we are thinking of paradox in Socratic terms right now. And he's not letting the cat out of the bag yet. He's saying, yeah, we're thinking of paradox as something intellectual. So we haven't yet broken through. The idea, it's not what the paradox is, it's who the paradox is. And when we think in terms of who, it changes the whole idea of the paradox, because now we have an encounter, not a reasonable, rational, intellectual encounter with learning, but an encounter with a being. And that being is the teacher. And that teacher is the Christ. So it's when we have the encounter with the true being of Christ that we become aware of our sinfulness, and we become aware of his righteousness and his eternality and our temporality. So
it's almost as if when we make the effort to have the encounter, that's when the condition is bestowed upon us. It's not like we are in awe of all these miracles and we realize, oh my God, we are not Christ, therefore we are sinful, we better get right with him or something like that. It's actually sort of taking him up on the offer, and then in that moment, in that Augenblick, we have the encounter with the Christ, and then therefore we are humbled. Is that kind of how you understand it?
Yes. If it were any other way, we would probably be able to get there through reasoning. And our purpose would be to solve the paradox. But it's not the purpose of the paradox. The purpose of the paradox is to inspire awe and wonder. And even as an intellectual thought, it inspires awe and wonder. But what about if this paradox was personified or embodied in an individual?
Right.
How great would that be?
Right.
Because then we can accept the paradox not just as a teaching in the Socratic method, but we could accept the paradox as a being, and we could love the paradox and be loved by the paradox. So it brings that humanity, our humanity, to a whole new level, because with the paradox, you can't love a paradox, can you? And you can't be loved by an intellectual paradox. It's almost like a quest to solve. But if that paradox becomes embodied in a human, in a being, we can love that being and be loved by that being. And it brings us to a whole new level.
Now, so what would you say, right? I'm in agreement in large part with what you and Kierkegaard are saying. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate a little bit here.
That's okay.
what would you say if someone said, hey, look, Christ wasn't the first person to claim to be the Messiah, and he certainly wasn't the last. And, I think I've actually been to the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, and some of those Branch Davidian individuals think that David Koresh is going to reappear on Earth. They still visit his grave and anticipate that he will be resurrected or coming again or something like that. What I guess the thing I'm trying to understand here is those individuals seem to think that they have been born again in their own moment with their false Messiah. What's to say? How do we tell them that they're misguided?
How do we identify?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is
well, all through history, we have Joseph Smith makes the same claim. Like you said, Koresh makes the claim. There's many other people who make the claim as individuals or as groups that the Messiah has come down as our leaders. We're all part of it. This is kind of the question of the age. How do we identify false messiahs? Jesus himself said there will be false messiahs. There'll be other people claiming, here I am, come out to the desert. And he says, but when you hear these things, don't go. So the problem is people try to find the Messiah as an intellectual quest, kind of as a quest to find the Messiah. We have to seek truth. And let's say if I encountered the Messiah, if I encountered David Koresh, and he says, I am the Messiah, I would say, okay, I'm going to listen to what you have to say, and I'm going to watch how you behave. And I'm going to see whether you're doing the things of my Heavenly Father. I'm going to see if you have the love of God. I'm going to see if you've given everything up. Did David Koresh fit that? I don't think so.
No, he did not. No, he didn't.
Okay. So, yeah, I wouldn't just say, I'm going to disregard you. Okay, I'll listen to what you have to say and I'll watch what you have to do. I'm not going to say, well, do a miracle, because then I'd be like the Pharisees who said the same thing to Christ. I would just say, well, I follow the truth. If what you're saying and what you're doing harmonizes with the truth that I've come to understand as my God, then maybe you're onto something. But so far, none of those have lived up to that. And I've looked into most of them, practically all of them, because I've made it for years. I've studied heresy, and I've studied other religions, and I've studied other Christian denominations and Christian heretics. I've said, well, let me not be too hasty. Let me hear what you have to say.
Right.
I've studied Arius. I said, I want to hear what you have to say, not what other people say about you. And so far, I'm still left with Jesus.
Right.
So that's my testimony, So, yeah, I don't exclude other people when they make the claim. I just put them to the test. Let me hear what you say. Let me watch what you do. And why are you as good as Christ or better? Do I need another Christ? Because I was already warned of others to come. So that kind of already, piques my interest when somebody makes the claim.
Kierkegaard was really interested in this issue too. Well, I don't know if this one directly, but I don't know if you've read it, but have you read his book called The Book of Adler? I think we've talked about it at some point.
Yeah, I think you told me about it.
Yeah, I think in that scenario, there was a person that was contemporary with him who thought like he was receiving messages from God about systematic philosophy being kind of like this new revelation or something like that. And then he kind of and then there was a recantation involved or something like that. We'll take it up at some point. But
wasn't even Hegel kind of like on the verge of saying that with his theology, with his philosophy, that it was God? It's almost intertwines itself around the notion of God is his philosophy.
Well, yeah, and that's the interesting thing is it really depends on how you interpret Hegel, but I think there is some idea that at some point when you're doing Hegelian philosophy, you start to become an instrument of of mind, of the mind.
Of the mind. Okay, capital M.
Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know Hegel enough to say that with certainty. And there are a lot of Hegelians who are materialists and
yeah. And I'm getting this from people who've read it and interpreted him. So yeah. I'm not trying to make people think I'm a Hegelian. I'm not.
Yeah.
That's the impression I got from him. So now he's going to say, who then is the disciple? The contemporary learner, he says, is a historical eyewitness. So we can put him in a classification. Those people who walk with Jesus, we can say they were contemporary historical eyewitnesses. They existed in history. He doesn't have a knowledge of the entire history of the teacher, though. He only has some facts. Even a contemporary who walks with Jesus didn't always walk with Jesus. I mean, Jesus has a childhood. Jesus went on his mission before he met the disciples. And even while he was with the disciples, he went on certain missions without them. So they weren't with him every living moment of the time. They didn't have a complete history of Christ simply by being with him. So this doesn't make them a disciple simply because they were historical contemporaries of him. It only makes him historically significant, perhaps like a historian. So my own personal belief is that I believe it's very possible that Matthew, the tax collector, was taking notes on this little mud pad that they used to make. I forgot the name of it, but the students would make mud pads, and they would write down what the rabbi or the teacher said. And so it's my own belief, and I'm not trying to convince anybody of this, that we've had disciples who are actually taking notes of what Jesus was saying, which actually becomes what they call the quell or the Q document. If you've never heard of that, don't ask.
Well, actually, I do want to ask because I don't get an opportunity to talk to someone who has such theological training as you. Like, well, actually, we do talk every day, but sometimes our conversations are a little bit more ordinary than this. From what I understand, the Q document, that's the I don't know how would you describe the Q document? Because I think it is a really fascinating thing to talk about. And I know it's a little bit of a digression, but I can only imagine that our audience would be interested in that.
Well, if not, they've already been queued up now to find out how am I going to answer this question. A Q document, it's called Q. It means quell. It's a German word. Boy, I forgot what the German word means. I forgot. I'm sorry. I forgot. I can look it up. Oh, okay. You do that while I'm talking. And it's a theoretical document where certain people who have translated and studied the New Testament, the Gospels, that is, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, say there are commonalities between those three documents in actually precise quotations that they use about the things that Jesus said and did.
So it means Q or quell means source.
Source, okay. So, and they consider this the source document of those statements that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are making that appear to be taken from one source. So they prepared this Q document, actually, where they've labeled it in numbers, I think, so that they can refer to these numbers as a source document when they study Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is kind of off on his own. These are why they call Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called synoptics, because they have something together. They're compatible with one another, and they use a lot of different sources. It's the same sources. So the quell document was supposedly one source. So the question comes, where did it come from? So my theory, my theoretical answer is it comes from perhaps Matthew, who had the skill of writing. They weren't all literate, but Matthew was a tax collector. He had to keep records. So he would have had the knowledge of making these little clay tablets to take notes of what Jesus said. And so later on, these notes were documented in papyrus or scrolls and then spread around and used as this source. Again, it's just theory upon theory, okay? But it answers some questions.
I think it's a pretty. I'm looking over the Wikipedia, just sort of skimming it, and it seems what you're saying is pretty congruent with what's up here. Actually, there's a pretty interesting little illustration for the Q source on Wikipedia if you want to take a look at it, where it has Matthew and Luke deriving from it, and then Mark sort of copying Matthew and Luke. But we should get back to the Kierkegaard. But I found that to be, again, another illustrative digression.
Well, yeah, and hopefully it'll interest people enough to read the New Testament a little bit more and understand it, that it's an interesting document. So if a contemporary even did spend every waking minute with the teacher, would that make him a disciple? So some might say, yeah, sure. But Kierkegaard says, no. That, you could spend every minute with Christ, with the teacher. It wouldn't make you a disciple. He could give evidence of the history, but he wouldn't be a disciple. So even if he took notes, like Matthew, it wouldn't make Matthew a disciple necessarily, because he wrote down everything that Jesus said. Another contemporary interested in only the doctrine of the teacher, who remembers everything that is said, and was concerned with the accuracy of the teaching, would that make him a disciple? No. Now, there were people there who memorized, book after book or scroll after scroll of the Old Testament. They had it all in their mind. So it would not be realm of logic to think that people had photographic memories of what Christ said and could remember word for word what he said. But that doesn't make him a teacher, a student, a disciple, rather. Makes him a student, but not a disciple, right, or a learner. What about a contemporary who lived outside the area, but he moved back to the area right before the teacher dies, and it comes to him right before death? Would this prevent him from becoming a disciple? So what if this person who didn't know about Christ, or maybe heard about this Christ, this teacher, but he never got a chance to go, and finally he leaves, he packs up, he makes a visit, and he gets to teach to the teacher, but he finds the teacher's on his deathbed, and all he gets to do is see the teacher? Would that make him a disciple? No. But would it prevent him from becoming a disciple? No. Just because he missed all the teachings and he missed the very life of Christ, the teacher, would that prevent him from being a disciple? And the answer is no. If he went, if when he came to the teacher, he began to understand himself, would that make him a disciple? So let's say he goes to the teacher, and the teacher tells him something pretty awesome, and then introverts himself, and he says, wow, let me think about that. Would that make him a disciple? No, that's still not a disciple, because the teacher is, again, only accidental. Understanding his teaching only is no different than being a disciple of Socrates. The key issue here is that the eternal and the historical are separate from one another. That's what his conclusion. So the historical and what was the other one? The historical and the eternal are separate. And again, he really goes into this in the next chapter, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But he's making a distinction between what's historical, means it has a beginning and an end. Okay, but what's eternal has no beginning or no end. So they're two different things. So we're trying to turn or create disciples based upon their historical encounter. And Kierkegaard is saying you can't do that. You have to get beyond the historical if you want to become a disciple. So, how are we doing on time here? Do we want to?
I think I saw your breaking point in your notes. I think we want to get to that point, or maybe we've already gotten to it. I think we.
Oh no, I got a little bit more left. Okay, I see where I have it.
I think we've been going for about an hour or an hour and 15 minutes, so I think we've got a good chunk for people to digest. I think that would be a good stopping point.
You want to go to the break point?
Yeah, let's go there.
Oh, okay. So he deals now with faith and the paradox. The object of faith is the paradox. Just like when you have faith maybe in a person, you have faith in religion, you have faith in a statue. It doesn't matter. Faith has an object. So he says, in this case, faith is in the paradox. Right? Kind of getting to that point where I kind of circumvented this. But now if we're thinking of a paradox, we have faith in the paradox. And faith unifies the contradictories. The contradictories here he's talking about is the historical and the eternal. Faith is able to get us beyond that historical, eternal conflict, contradiction. This is a person who accepts the paradox as the paradox, making the eternal historical and the historical eternal. So both are present in the teacher as God and man. So now he's bringing that idea that I kind of gave you a little earlier into range. He's saying, okay, faith is the tool that God gives us to unite the contradictories when we run into them in paradox. It's not just something given to us because it's a leftover from our prehistoric days or something. It's actually a purpose, a psychological purpose, a philosophical, a theological purpose to faith that we've ignored for many years, that philosophy ignores and science ignores. But there's a purpose for faith. And this is the great distinction that between faiths, other faiths, and Christianity. Other faiths have faith in something, but we have faith in a paradox. And I don't know if any other faiths can say they have faith in a paradox. So they have faith in something, but usually it's on this side of history, this side of the historical, or it's on the other side of the historical. It's all eternal. So Kierkegaard making this distinction: if you have faith in the historical, it's not paradoxical. If you have faith in the eternal, it's not paradoxical. But if you have faith in the historical eternal, then you have faith in the paradoxical. And that's the only time that faith will really work, when we have the proper object. So anyway, this is it. That faith is not a form of knowledge. For all knowledge is either a knowledge of the eternal, which is spiritual knowledge, excluding the temporal and the historical as kind of indifferent. In other words, I have faith in the eternal, so the historical doesn't matter. As long as I know the teaching, and a lot of people are in that place today. Christ didn't need to be here. Who cares if he came or not? I love God. I believe in the eternal, so it doesn't matter what happens in history. Or it's pure historical knowledge. No knowledge can have for its object the absurdity that the eternal is the historical, except for Christianity. So that's the biggest distinction that we can make. What makes Christians, true Christians, different than everybody else is because our faith is not in the eternal alone, nor is it in the historical alone. It's in the absurdity that the eternity is historical and the historical is the eternal. Okay. So if anybody on the street asks you what the difference is, there's your answer. That should cause a little head scratching, right?
Right.
And okay. In faith, the learner is connected to the teacher, both eternally and historically, because the teacher is both. See, this is where we get to the point that the teacher is the paradox. I'm giving it away a little bit, but so that we don't get totally lost, that's where he's taking us. Both the historical and the eternal are in the teacher in Christianity. As Climacus presupposes, the teacher contributes now the condition to the learner, because now the teacher has the ability to be the condition, to give the condition. For this to happen, the object of faith must be the teacher rather than the teaching, making it different from the Socratic method where the learner himself is the truth, and he has the condition all along. All he has to do is recall it. In the Socratic method, once the learner has the truth, he no longer needs the teacher. Faith is different than reason. Why is faith different? It makes hold of the teacher, or grasps the teacher. And if the teacher can give the condition, then he must be God. Because we've already shown that the condition can only come from the divine. Otherwise, it's back in the Socratic method, assuming we already have the condition. In order for him to be able to give it to the learner, he must be man as well. Because he must be equal. Because, as you'll find out, the way the condition is transferred, love is involved. And complete understanding is involved. So the teacher has to also be human in order to make this transfer appropriate and complete. This is the paradox of the moment, which is the object of faith. Why must the teacher be God? This is my question. I kind of asked, like you asked me questions, I kind of asked myself the question. Why must the teacher be God to give the condition? Well, in the Socratic method, it was assumed that God had put the condition in man at creation. If we go all the way back to the beginning, that's the presupposition of Socrates, is that man was born with the condition. God gave it to him. The ability for man to know truth was given prior to birth. In our hypothesis, the condition is given at the moment, but it is a condition linked to the eternal. The condition is faith, given by the presence of the eternal God in human form. So our faith now rests in the eternal. In order to have faith in the eternal, the condition must also bring us to the ability to comprehend the eternal. Only the eternal can do that. No one can give us or cause faith in God except God. I cannot give it to Luke, and Luke, you can't give it to me. If we could, we'd be the Socratic method. I'd give it to you, and then you wouldn't need me anymore. You wouldn't, and I wouldn't need you if you could give it to me. You'd be done. You'd serve your purpose, and now you could get a new sidekick. I hope you don't. I hope you don't.
I think I'm your sidekick.
No, you kick my side more than I kick yours. Okay, faith is not an act of will. So this is the last statement here. Faith is not an act of will. If I could understand the paradox by willing my understanding, I would be proving the Socratic method. The point of view where the will exercises my innate condition, and truth would simply be recollecting it. So now if we understand one thing, we should understand the difference between Climacus's idea of the condition and Socrates and the Socratic idea of the condition. Okay, so this is where we'll leave it. This is my break point for today.
All right, fantastic. Well, I think most of my questions were handled throughout, so I think we should bring it to a close here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Go download the Noetic app, and if you're listening to this at some point in the future, go and visit our website. We've got a lot of features that I think you'll enjoy. Robert, I want to thank you for a really, really exquisite lesson today. You're really good at this.
Well,
you're really good at this.
It's a blessing for me to have somebody ask questions, because to know something and not be able to share it is frustrating. To have somebody actually be interested in what I have to say is rewarding. So I thank you.
Yeah, man. Well, at some point, maybe we should do like a whole separate thing where we do little bios on the people that teach for Noetic. Like, I'd love to know how you developed your methodology, because I have a personal story about how I developed my own methodology, and I'd like to know, where you developed your methodology and how you figured it out and how you kind of came into your own as a teacher. I'm sure there are other people that would like to know that one day. We could have a conversation about that, but I'd like to know it right now. So maybe you can tell me one day. Unfortunately, I have to go and prepare the Jane Eyre seminar and upload all this content.
Don't forget, listen to the Jane Eyre seminar. I'm sure it will be very interesting.
Yeah, it will. It will. I've been doing a lot of background research on it, so I'll be able to bring in some secondary sources and some other books in order to bring an enhanced understanding of that text if you are interested. So, okay, let's end it here. And Bob, I'll talk to you later tonight, probably.
Okay. Blessings to all.
All right. See you, Bob.
Bye-bye.